Should you pull Dialyn for Shunguang? The answer is yes and. Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about Dialyn pull value, specifically whether you should get her with Shunguang. There are several factors where Dialyn is a worthwhile pull to go for, but at the same time there are certain things that you should be aware of before you make this decision to go for her. So specifically regarding Shunguang's situation, just as a heads up, as of right now, the stun damage multiplier from Dialyn does not work with Shunguang. So if you're playing Dialyn with Shunguang, you will get the extra free ultimate out of it, which is beneficial. However, the stun damage multiplier is not gonna be available. However, as of right now, Dialyn is, even with this limitation, still the choice to go for Shunguang, specifically paired with Zhao. Zhao is also very much needed necessity for Shunguang. Fortunately, she's being given for free supposedly, and if you look at her mindscape, some people even speculating that maybe she's gonna be like a standard character or something like that. Because if you think about reruns, I don't know how they're gonna go about it with Shunguang rerun in the future without having Zhao available for free or some other alternative. Because right now, Zhao is the only effective Ether character that can trigger Shunguang entry skill. And the entry skill is very important because it's gonna put her into enhanced transform state as well. Besides the ultimate route, yes, you can also get it through the ult. But now let's go back to Dialyn. She effectively, at least on Shunguang release, will still be best in slot for Shunguang, simply because there is not really other alternatives. And right now you'd be basically playing Zhao Dialyn with Shunguang. However, if you do not have enough gems to get Shunguang by pulling Dialyn, then I obviously would recommend you to skip Dialyn and prioritize getting Shunguang, because Shunguang with free Zhao, supposedly free Zhao, and some other teammates such as Astria or something like that, is still gonna work relatively fine. And there's also a risk down in the future that Dialyn will probably get replaced within Shunguang team, not as a best in slot anymore necessarily. I do believe Zhao is probably first in line to get replaced before Dialyn. Initially thought it might be Dialyn first, but now that I've seen more of Zhao, specifically the rework, the character totally makes sense that it is given for free, supposedly, because her numbers, her kit, it's pretty much just there to enable Shunguang, and if she did not have this Ether Veil mechanic and Shunguang didn't need it or was, let's say, dependent on it to get more DPS out of her, you pretty much would not be playing Zhao realistically, just like you don't probably play Caesar. Feels bad, man. Caesar, best waifu. But what basically makes Dialyn best in slot for Shunguang, at least on release, is that you will have these extra free ultimates. So effectively, you will have a higher uptime of her enhanced state throughout the battle. Also, from what I heard, there is supposedly a way to get quote-unquote 10 uptimes of her enhanced state. However, realistically, you probably would not be able to do that because we're not all super skillful players. But nevertheless, as of right now, Dialyn will work with Shunguang, but just as a heads up, I personally would not recommend using up your gems in a way that you would not have enough gems to guarantee Shunguang plus her signature W engine. I would say that is the higher priority to get. If you want to make the end game easier, there's always gonna be reruns, and also, like I already said, the likelihood of a new teammate coming up for Shunguang is very highly likely to happen, much like it happened for Shu1 and Miyabi respectively. That is why I would recommend to not overcommit your gems on Dialyn if it makes it that you cannot get the W engine plus Shunguang together, ideally. Also, it is true that Dialyn does provide a lot of value for all others type of teams as well. So if it's something that you can afford to pull, I would highly recommend. She will enhance a lot of your existing stuff. I guess you also might be wondering, but what about going for Dialyn and Shunguang and completely skip keeping Shunguang signature W engine. Wouldn't be steel cushion good enough, and unfortunately steel cushion as of right now is not a good option simply because Shunguang has so much critical rate. She gets it from her core skill. She also has a passive ability with stacking critical rate boost. I believe it goes up to 30% from there, and plus she has also new drive this set that gives her further critical rate. I believe on top of my head should be like plus 70% critical rate just by the new disc and passives alone, even if you don't have any substats. So obviously you'll have some critical rate substats, and basically you will easily overcap the critical rate, and it's such a waste, right? However, there is a fair alternative that you could consider going for, which would be Brimstone. Brimstone does provide a lot of attack, and it will not overcap her critical rate stuff at least, so that could be an option you could go for, and then you would be able to still pull Dialyn plus Shunguang and go with Brimstone if you have it. However, her signature W engine, perhaps right now it might not seem that enticing, but I would not be surprised that it might get changed and buffed further if it's already not strong enough, because generally for Void Hunters type of characters, they like to give them very strong W engines, and personally I think it's quite recommended to go for W engine for these type of characters to make the content easier throughout the year. But as a reminder, there are always reruns anyway, and you can always get it on a rerun as well. Also, just as a heads up, Astra Yao should be weaker for Shunguang than Dialyn option, but if you're strapped for gems and you don't have enough gems, I just recommend just use Astra, play with that free Zhao, and your Shunguang is still gonna perform fine. It's gonna be okay. Patience is the key, and also speaking of patience, I highly recommend to not pull Dialyn necessarily day one, because things can still change within 2.5 throughout the banner duration of Dialyn. So the more you delay pulling Dialyn, the better choice you'll be able to make, if you ask me. Smile. I guess we can also have a nice bonus section for Dialyn W engine mindscapes. I also like to quickly mention Banyue as well and his W engine. But before that, I would also like to let you know that a lot of you guys who watch me are not subscribed. If you'd like to support this small channel, feel free to subscribe. It's completely free of charge. Smile. And now let's talk about Dialyn W engine. Is Dialyn W engine worthwhile going for? Effectively, it is a nice upgrade. However, you do have nice free-to-play options that you can use, such as Steam Oven, or even S-Rank options, such as Hellfire Gears. That's why I would not recommend people to pull for Dialyn W engine, because you probably won't have enough pulls then to get Shunguang guaranteed, and ideally with her signature instead. But if you do happen to have a lot of gems saved, you could potentially do it. You can also consider it for her mindscapes like M1, which does provide a nice ignore 50% of all attribute res, and also does boost somewhat her personal damage. Her M2 is basically useless as of right now for Shunguang. It's not gonna work. Personally, I would not recommend to overcommit on Dialyn dupes, let alone her W engine over Shunguang. But if you do have enough gems, you could consider her M1 or signature. But do remember that you could get potentially also instead M2 of Shunguang, which probably will be even better. And unlike Miyabi, I believe Shunguang has relatively decent mindscapes, and I wouldn't be surprised that Shunguang is gonna have, whatever it's gonna be finalized, also quite good M2 mindscape, so we'll see how that will end up being. I guess we can also quickly mention Banyue. Should you go for Banyue? Absolutely not. I don't recommend it from a meta perspective. Like, even in the future content, doesn't seem he's gonna get much shielding or specific buffs for him like what Idari received, although there will be some Fire Week content at least, and somewhat generic buffs that he'll be able to take advantage of. However, his W engine is a decent option if you wanna improve your Manato. So if you're somebody who plays Manato, then you could consider Banyo W engine for Manato, but do know that even with the W engine on Manato, it's not necessarily gonna extend his lifespan that far. and this is more like a, you know, very premium thing, or you're like a super big fan of Manato, right? Because otherwise you'd be using the pulse for Shunguang. Let's be realistic, right? So yeah, this is pretty much it for this video. If you have any questions or would like to add anything yourself, feel free to write it within the comments down below. And as always, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a like and all that YouTube stuff. I wish you a wonderful day, guys, and see you in the next video. Ciao!